They consist of legendary coaches and legendary players whose feats on the gridiron have left an indelible mark on how the game was meant to be played. They are the yardsticks by which all others are measured. They are loved and hated, admired and exalted. They are what every program strives to be, and yet few will ever attain it. Their title is forever desired, seldom reached, and an achievement cherished. Rarely does greatness exist in a single entity, an entity that can only be created over time. Because of dynasties, we are able to remember who was great.
Alabama has been looked down upon by so many people, uneducated, redneck, racist, all the words that you can think of. But when Bear Bryant came along, and the state of Alabama felt there's one thing that the rest of America doesn't look down at Alabama. We don't look up to anybody in college football. It's what we are good at, and it's what every single person in that state is proud of.
When you mention the most beloved Southerners, it's Robert E. Lee and Bear Bryant. Jimmy Carter's third. I mean, that's how beloved he is. He's bigger than Jimmy Carter.
A coach told me one time he would recruit the state of Alabama, and he would walk into a white family's home, and he would see a picture of Jesus Christ and John F. Kennedy and Bear Bryant. And he'd go into a black family's home and be a picture of Jesus Christ, Martin Luther King, and Bear Bryant. I mean, that's how much his influence went throughout the state.
The Alabama dynasty is synonymous with Paul the Bear Bryant. But Bryant wasn't the first Bear to roam the Alabama sidelines.
The players called him the Bear, not to his face, but Wallace Wade was a disciplinarian of the first order, and the players, if they saw him coming down the street, they would cross over and walk down the other sidewalk. And you didn't dare let him see you with a girl. He didn't believe that the players ought to be dating during the football season.
Wallace Wade established Alabama football. In 1925, his team went undefeated and became the first Southern team to be invited to the Rose Bowl. Nobody gave the Crimson Tide much of a chance to win. At the time, Southern football was often overlooked.
The South was pretty much isolated back in those days before interstates and even highways and cars and media, and people just really didn't think much of Southern football.
Alabama was hardly the first choice to go to the Rose Bowl that year. In fact, 3 teams were invited before them. I don't think anybody in the country thought Alabama stood a chance against Washington.
Alabama went on to defeat the heavily favored Huskies 20-19. They stunned the college football world, and they gave football fans south of the Mason-Dixon something to cheer about.
Well, for a long, long time, people's self-esteem in the South, they need to have something to hang their hat to. Football as a sport was something that we could go beat our chest very proudly and say, we're at the top of this, we've arrived, we're a part of what y'all are.
In 1934, Alabama won its third Rose Bowl in less than a decade. And wearing crimson red that year was a young end, Paul Bryant. Bryant became one of the game's top coaches as he turned around programs at Maryland, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. But by the 1950s, Bryant's beloved alma mater fell on tough times. 4 wins in 3 seasons prompted the school to look for a new head coach.
Mama called. That's why Bear Bryant came to Alabama. His heart was always with the Crimson Tide, and he knew if he ever had the chance to come back, he'd do it in a heartbeat.
Bryant came to Alabama in 1958, and right away, he brought change to the program.
When he looked at a young man in 3 or 4 minutes, he'd either know that he wanted him or he knew that he didn't.
He says he never got the most out of the great players, but give him an average player or a little below average player and he could get them to think they were great players.
Bryant molded players into his own likeness. He once said, "You never know how a horse will pull until you hook him to a heavy load."
The practices were so tough and so grueling and so mental that you actually look forward to the games on Saturday.
Rich Swingo was playing hurt, and Coach Bryant didn't know Rich was hurt. And Rich had a broken bone in his ankle and one in his elbow, but he wasn't stopping. And so Coach Bryant thought Rich wasn't hustling because we were doing a drill and everybody beat Rich back to the line, and so Coach Bryant said, "Do it over for Wingo." So they line up and they do it again. And Rich gets the ball and he's the last one through the line. Before he crosses the line, Coach Bryant is on him, grabs him by the face mask and by the back of the jersey and said, "Get your off my football field, you're off my team."
Bryant's brutal tactics resurrected the Alabama program. During the 1960s, his Crimson Tide teams claimed 3 national championships.
According to this beautiful plaque I'm holding here, the Alabama football team was national champion in 1961. With my limited vocabulary, there's no way that I can adequately say how very proud that I am of the football team.
Bryant won with all-white teams as he worked within Alabama's segregated society. But as the 1960s progressed, integrated schools created an uneven playing field, and Bryant's Crimson Tide teams were starting to slide. In 1970, a 42-21 loss to USC would prove to be one of the most important games in Alabama history.
When Bear Bryant got his brains beat in by Southern California in Birmingham and Sam Bam Cunningham, Bear Bryant that night told his coaches that we're going to start recruiting black players. It wasn't a matter of conscience, it was a matter of winning. And his fans and Southerners understood that. And once Bryant did it, then everybody else in the South knew it was okay. But they were waiting on Bryant to lead the way. That's what an impact he was. And integration never would have happened when it did in Southern football if not for Bear Bryant.
Paul Bryant was very much aware socially of what was going on. And he was also very much aware, and he was selfish to this point, he knew if he could keep the black athletes at home in Alabama, he could beat anybody. And he sold it, and Sam Cunningham helped him.
In 1971, Alabama's football team would finally integrate.
Pitches to Patrick. Patrick breaks the tackle at the 45. Still on his feet.
And a new era of the Alabama dynasty was born.
Everything could be hanging on 4th and goal with a half a yard. Goldman. He didn't make it. It is over. Alabama has defeated Penn State, and the Bear goes for a ride.
Bryant proved that he could adapt to the times as his integrated Crimson Tide teams captured 3 national championships in just 7 years.
Bryant meant so much, and Alabama football meant so much to the people of the state because of the times we lived in. The state was ridiculed, and rightfully so, by the rest of the country for what was going on in civil rights. But here was Alabama, and here was something we did well. And, you know, we're screwing this up, we're screwing that up, but we can line up and beat your ass on Saturday. You know, that meant something.
One game, O.J. carried the ball about 35 times, and somebody says, isn't he carrying the ball too much? And the great McKay line says, why? It only weighs 18 ounces.
From Mike Garrett to O.J. Simpson, from Anthony Davis to Charles White and Marcus Allen, it is the legacy of Tailback U.
That's where the running backs go. That's the place that they want to make their mark. That's where they know they can go there, and they know they can run the ball 40 times a game.
We took pride in being an offensive lineman at USC because we knew that you're going to get a chance to play and block for a Heisman Trophy, and I was able to do that.
The USC running tradition started in 1925 under legendary coach Howard Jones. His teams were nicknamed the Thundering Herd as they ran opposing teams into submission.
There wasn't a better man for figuring out defenses. They like to talk about 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Well, with Howard Jones, it was 3 yards and working for a first down.
Howard Jones's pounding, methodical running game led the Trojans to 3 national championships during his tenure. But in the 1960s, John McKay brought glamour to the USC running game. His system was known as student body left and student body right.
We were not the first people to ever use the I formation. We were the first people to put a tailback back there about 7.5 yards.
I loved it because as a tailback, I could see the entire field from one end to the other. You have big horses in front of you, and you hit the ball deep in the backfield. I mean, you can almost do anything.
In 1965, Mike Garrett led the nation in running and became USC's first Heisman Trophy winner. He was also the first graduate of Tailback U.
O.J. Simpson said he almost went to Cal in the last minute. He remembered seeing that horse going around the field every time USC would score a touchdown. And that's where he wanted to go because that was the way to go to the Rose Bowl. That was the way to make an All-American. That was the way to win a national championship. And then when he got there, the lid just blew off.
O.J. Simpson led the country in rushing for 2 straight seasons and handed McKay his first national championship.
O.J. Simpson is the greatest runner in the history of college football. Won the Heisman Trophy in '68, played on a team that won the national title in '67, and made that unbelievable 64-yard run to beat UCLA 21-20, which was the springboard to win the national title.
McKay's Trojans won 2 more national championships with Anthony Davis in the backfield. Even when McKay left to coach in the NFL, head coach John Robinson continued the running tradition that his predecessors started.
You know, I was smart enough to know that my best chance to succeed was to carry on the legend.
That was our biggest selling point at USC was tradition. You can be a part of this. And I think each guy wanted to be like the guy that preceded him.
Charles White led USC to a national championship in 1978, and he won the Heisman Trophy a year later.
Touchdown, USC!
But Tailback U still had one more to showcase.
Marcus Allen was a high school quarterback, and we recruited him as a defensive back. And they have a lobby in USC where they have the Heisman trophies, Mike Garrett's, O.J. Simpson's, and he was walking through there, and we were just coming from opposite direction. He said, "Hey, Coach, I can't win one of these trophies at DB, can I?" And I said, "I don't think so." He says, "Well, you better make me a tailback so I can win one of these." So I moved him the next day to tailback, and he's got one sitting in there now.
You know, you very often see coaches who have players who go on to become great coaches themselves, but rarely do you ever see a coach who has his thumbprint on 3 dynasties. Bernie Bierman did that.
In the 1930s, Bernie Bierman's Minnesota Golden Gophers dominated, winning 5 national championships in just 8 seasons. His nickname was the Silver Fox. He was a cunning tactician on the field, but elusive off of it.
He was a little dull. He was quite straight. In fact, if he saw his players walking down the street, he was so distant, he would actually walk to the other side of the street to try to avoid them in a social situation. He just didn't deal with people very well.
Bierman's offense was run by an All-American quarterback, Charles Bud Wilkinson. After leaving his mentor's tutelage, Wilkinson would carry Bierman's legacy to Oklahoma, where he took the Sooners' head coaching job in 1947.
Bernie Bierman on the sideline, coat and tie, press shirt, fedora, looked like $1 million when in that era most coaches had chili stains on their shirt. Bud Wilkinson, 10 years later, appears on the scene. What is he wearing? Flannel suit, red tie, fedora, looks just like Bernie Bierman. There is no question that Bernie Bierman had a fabulous impact on Bud Wilkinson from the way he coached, the way he looked, to the way he walked the sideline.
In his first 4 seasons, Wilkinson's teams lost just 4 games, winning their first national championship in 1950. But in 1953, the Sooners would embark on an unparalleled streak, 47 consecutive wins, the longest in college football history.
One of the most difficult things of the streak was actually getting it started. The 11th game of the streak was the second game of the 54 season. And here comes the TCU Horned Frogs. Late in the game, Oklahoma finally takes the lead, 21-16, and TCU is driving, and they're moving down the field and moving down the field and moving down the field. Johnny Crouch, one of their captains, catches a 21-yard touchdown pass. TCU wins. Johnny Crouch gets up, walks over to the official, and said, "I didn't catch it." They waved it off. Oklahoma wins. Otherwise, it's a loss.
You have to be lucky and good to win 47 games in a row, but mostly good. The cupboard was never empty at Oklahoma. Bud kept reloading it and reloading it. I mean, his teams were always stacked with talent.
In 1986, Barry Switzer was in a team meeting with his players at Oklahoma, and he had a reel of film. He said, "I'm going to show you guys what the old guys looked like back in the 50s. They were really slow." So he puts on the reel of film, turns out the light, starts the film. After about the 5th play, Barry turns to the projector and says, "It's running fast." They couldn't be that fast. They really were.
Like Minnesota in the 1930s, Oklahoma owned the 1950s as they went on to win 3 national championships. But in 1957, the luck of the Irish would end Wilkinson's streak.
It never rained on him. Home or away, it never rained on him. After the Notre Dame game, the public address announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's stand up and give a round of applause to Oklahoma for this fabulous 47-game winning streak." Well, everybody stood up and cheered, and they sat down and sat there for 30 minutes, and it started to rain. And there's this great scene of Bud Wilkinson walking past one of the fraternity houses, and they're clapping and they're cheering for him. And he never looks up. He's got his hat down, he's got on his coat, and he's walking through the rain.
Oklahoma's record streak of the mid-1950s was preceded by a 31-game win streak at the beginning of the decade. Instrumental in that stretch was a quarterback named Darrell Royal. He, too, would benefit from his former coach and use it to resurrect Texas football.
All through my coaching career, I used things that I was taught by Coach Wilkinson. I copied his coaching techniques. I copied the way he instructed his quarterbacks and the way he taught his quarterbacks. I ran some of the same plays to the last day I coached.
Royal succeeded as he unveiled an innovative offense that would forever change college football.
Darrell had a problem in 1968 when he had 2 terrific halfbacks and a fullback. The problem was, how do you get all 3 of those guys on the field at one time? So he turned the problem over to an assistant named Emory Ballard.
In the summer, Emory got his son and some other coaches' sons out in the yard and experimented with changing the alignment of the T formation. And some coaches would have said, "No, that's goofy, we're not doing that." But Darrell, I think, saw the benefits of it.
The new offense left many people wondering what they were watching. When told in a post-game interview that it looked like a pulley bone, Royal said simply, "Call it the wishbone."
We thought it wouldn't work. I mean, we didn't think we had enough time to read the tackle and try to pitch off the end. We get into the second ball game of the year against Texas Tech. We get behind 21-0. Coach Royal, he called me over. He says, "Hell, you can't do any worse." And he just shoved me on out there to go in. We didn't make a first down the first time out, or my first time out, came back in, and from then on we drove every time, scored a touchdown.
With their vaunted wishbone attack, Royal's Longhorns captured 3 national championships. Like Wilkinson before him, Royal would lead Texas on a memorable winning streak, 30 games in a row.
Darrell Royal said one of the most interesting things I've ever heard, and that was at Bud's funeral. And he was sort of addressing Bud during the eulogy, and he said, "Bud," he said, "a lot of my players went on to coach, and they think that they took my ideas on into coaching. I want to thank you for those ideas which have been passed along from Bierman." That tells you the story.
This is what you worked for all this time. We got 75,000, there's one in every seat, and they came here to see Hurricane football. Offense, defense, the kicking game. Let's go like a bunch of crazy men and play some games. Oh, yeah! Hold on.
Miami was characterized by speed and power on the field and a joyful disregard for the rules of civilized society as we know it on the field and off the field. You know, to them, you didn't respect your opponent. You beat the hell out of them and then you crowed about it.
In 1978, the Hurricanes football program was deteriorating and on the verge of dropping to Division I AA.
All budgets were froze, so we would have to go down to the corner and put quarters in the payphones to make our recruiting calls. So I knew we had to do something really dramatic.
Miami's football future seemed bleak at best, but head coach Howard Schnellenberger made crucial decisions that altered the direction of the program.
In years past, they always went back up into Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, where they had come from to try to bring in players. And what they were doing, in essence, was bring in the second best players.
What he started to do was keep the players in Miami that were good players, and to keep kids in the state of Florida to go to the University of Miami.
And then what he did was he really cut these guys loose and let them play. And maybe it wasn't the way everybody else wanted kids to play in terms of, you know, it was a kind of a bragging, kind of in-your-face style football. He did that, and those kids flourished there.
Schnellenberger rebuilt the program, and in 1983, he would lead his underdog Hurricanes to the school's first ever national championship. 1 year later, the Jimmy Johnson era began. He built upon the success Schnellenberger started and took Miami's swagger to another level.
Well, with our players, with the attitude of our guys, they weren't going to be intimidated by anybody. I remember Michael, when he was a freshman, one of my coaches came over from the dining hall and said, "Hey, we had a big fight at the dining hall." I said, "Oh, no." I said, "Who was it?" He said, "Oh, this freshman wide receiver. We've got Michael Irvin and, you know, senior offensive guard." I said, "Well, how? That's a mismatch." They said, "Coach, it wasn't a mismatch. Michael just beat the hell out of the guy."
Football is intimidation. That's football. People are like, "Man, they ain't right." You take that away, you take away the identity, you take away what makes people, at least what they think, make them great.
Miami got into their opponent's head. The Hurricanes' swagger gave them an edge, and their NFL caliber talent pushed them over the top.
We went in to University of Oklahoma, and old Jerome Brown and all of our guys saw Oklahoma walk onto the field, and they were saying, "Hey, fresh meat. Here comes some fresh meat." I'm scared to death. I'm wanting to tell Jerome, "Hey, quiet. You know, hold it down. Don't make these guys mad because they're really good." And I remember Melvin Bratton, one play in the game, he hits Brian Bosworth and knocks him flat to the ground and stood over the top of him, just saying, "Hey, guys, you know, y'all are in for an ass whipping today."
If you're gonna talk the talk, you better walk the walk. I mean, so we were kind of like that. You'd be warming up as we run on the field, because we'll run right through your warm-ups. Wow, right, you know, you got your organizer, we run right through it. And like, what are you gonna do about it? You know what I'm saying? It's almost like, what are you gonna do about it? We were a pretty crazy group, man. We had fun though. It worked.
Miami won 4 national championships in less than a decade. But off the field, their brazen reputation was starting to catch up with them.
You had a lot of off-field behavior that started. You know, you could go back to the fatigues, which they did during the Fiesta Bowl, and getting off like they're going to war. And they would go so far. I remember one of the receivers, Brett Perriman, told me a story of Tad Foote, the president of the school, once got on the plane, and the whole team is kind of chanting, Tad Foote, kiss our ass. And usually kids don't do that to the school president.
Any little thing that got out of hand at Miami was so distorted, and I think there was a lot of people in college football, they were wanting to knock Miami down.
They were tired of Miami winning, man. We've been winning games, and you know what I'm saying, they're just tired of us winning. They're tired of us winning the way we want. I don't know, they come up, man, they come up with some of everything.
When you saw the Miami guys strutting out there, you know, that cockiness, that air of confidence, the dance, the routine, the moves and all that, they were ready to play. And I don't know that it's a bad thing in college football for there to be a little individuality like that, be it from a player or from a team. And I don't know that it would work for Penn State, but it certainly worked for Miami.
In the 1990s, a culmination of scandals, incidents, and national headlines ended one of the most abrupt and tumultuous dynasties in the history of college football. Former Nebraska head coach Bill Jennings once said, "We can't feed the ego of the state of Nebraska with the football team." Perhaps that explains why his coaching career with the Cornhuskers was so short. In Nebraska, football is king, and every Saturday, Nebraskans put aside everything to rally behind their beloved Cornhuskers.
They make a difference. They are the difference. You know, we're one of the smallest states in the union, but we have a positive attitude about our football. We must have winning football, and we have to win.
Legendary coach Bob Devaney created the trademark Sea of Red, and ever since his arrival in 1962, Nebraska has enjoyed home sellouts at Memorial Stadium.
The whole state believed in Bob Devaney. And he kind of single-handedly really turned the Big Red around, and he was out there constantly selling the program across the entire state of Nebraska. And people loved him, and they identified with him, and he identified with the people.
Devaney was a devout believer in running the football. He believed the outcome of the game should be placed in the collective hands of the offensive linemen, not in the hands of a single quarterback. The coach's game plan would deliver the Cornhuskers back-to-back national championships in 1970 and 71.
The 1971 Nebraska Cornhuskers were certainly one of the greatest college football teams of all time. In many ways, they brought a recognition to the state of Nebraska that they'd never had before.
The brains behind Devaney's potent offense in the early 70s was a quiet, unassuming offensive coordinator from Hastings, Nebraska. His name was Tom Osborne, and in 1972, Devaney handpicked him to be his successor.
I realized early on that I couldn't be Bob Devaney because there was only one Bob Devaney. So essentially, I tried to incorporate my own value system into how I coached.
Bob brought a tradition to Tom where we believed that winning wasn't everything, but we did rate it right up there with oxygen.
Expectations were high when Osborne took over. Though his Cornhusker teams plowed through season after season during the 1970s and 80s, Osborne could not win the big game.
You know, there were years where he could not beat Oklahoma. He never quite figured out how to better Switzer.
And the Oklahoma Sooners have now beaten the Nebraska Cornhuskers 5 consecutive times.
He was second-guessed for many years. I mean, the fans were critical.
It seemed like there for a number of years that no matter what happened, you were going to go to the Orange Bowl and see Nebraska get pounded by whoever it was on the other side of the field.
At the 1984 Orange Bowl, Osborne was poised to win his first national championship after Nebraska scored a touchdown late in the game.
Touchdown, Nebraska! The score was 31-30. And the question was whether we kick the point and tie.
I have not seen the kicker come on the field, and I don't think he's coming on the field. And we start lining up for 2-point, and the Orange Bowl guys are hollering, don't let him go for 2, make him kick the point. If he ties, he'll win the national title. If he doesn't make it, he won't.
This is for the national championship for Nebraska. Championship. The integrity of Nebraska football in that whole state was on the line. They gambled and lost.
We planned to go for the win. Nobody ever talked about a tie. And I really don't think that even if we had kicked the point, won the national championship, I think our players would have, they would have liked to wear their rings, but I don't think they would have felt good about it.
If you're a player at Nebraska, you're not going for a tie. You go to win. It's always to win. Not the stinking tie. Who wants to take a tie?
The Cornhuskers' late season failures continued to haunt Osborne.
The Huskers with a 2nd and 10. Frazier, Aaron throw. It's going to be recovered and taken in. Touchdown, Florida State.
From 1987 to 1993, Nebraska would lose 7 straight bowl games.
To go down to Miami or down to Florida State, we just couldn't compete because we had linebackers at 265 pounds, 50 pounds who could stop the run as good as anybody. And, we started changing the way they recruited, and we copied what Miami was doing.
The new-look Cornhuskers were a blend of size and speed. In 1995, they would once again play the Miami Hurricanes for the national championship on the same field they had lost so many times before.
Are up.
What did he tell us yesterday? He said, if I don't win this national championship, they'll probably put it on my tombstone.
Being chased, and that'll be a safety.
And now Nebraska has some much-needed momentum.
Schlesinger broke free and took it in for the score. The Nebraska team has owned the 4th quarter.
Smile, Tom.
Tom Osborne finally has his national championship. For 22 years, he labored and waited, and now the moment is his.
Fans in Nebraska made a 180-degree turn. All of a sudden, this man that they'd criticized before was now a football genius.
Osborne would deliver 3 national championships in just 4 years. He rebuilt the dynasty that was Nebraska football.
And you got a sense with Osborne that he knew what he was doing, he knew where he wanted to go, and he was just going to outlast anything that tried to stop him. And I think part of that, they say, is part of the Nebraska personality, that we're going to get through this. And you can't really rile a farmer. They've seen too many things happen.
There's a stretch of about 10 years where Yale plays, I think it's 112 games, shuts out the other side 100 times. So in that stretch, if you went to see every Yale home game, you might have to be at Yale for 2 years before you'd see the opposition score.
From 1876 to 1909, Yale would lose only 14 times. Throughout that 33-year period, there was one constant presence, Walter Camp. The New Haven native played for his hometown college and dedicated his life to the betterment of the sport.
Walter Camp was the first great innovator in the game of college football. When he was at Yale, the game was pretty much a rugby-type game, but he devised all kinds of new rules, brought in the idea of first downs, tackling below the waist, line of scrimmage. He knew that these changes would increase the popularity of the sport, not to mention improve his team's chances of winning.
Camp was a visionary, as well as a master of time discipline and efficiency. These traits were invaluable, as most opponents of the day were less prepared and poorly trained.
It's not a coincidence that Camp, when he's not coaching, works as a supervisor in a clock factory. It's about time, about the use of time, a lesson that Americans are learning how important and valuable time is as the nation becomes increasingly industrialized.
Camp's obligations at the clock factory often conflicted with his ability to run practices. He was so consumed with fielding championship caliber teams that it would literally become a family affair.
His wife is quite a piece of work. She was actually his assistant coach, and she came down each day to practice, and she would make notes, go home, sit down with Walter that night with some of the players, go over everything, and then the next day she'd come back with his ideas for the following day, and they'd go through practice, and she actually ran the practice. So she actually became the first woman coach, and Walter couldn't have been what he was without her.
With Alice at his side, Yale became the national team as they captured 11 championships.
Yale dominated the era, but Yale's legacy is much more than championships. So many college football programs can trace their roots directly back to Yale. You know, Alonzo Stagg, he went out to Chicago, Howard Jones out to USC, and some of Yale's alumni actually introduced football to some universities for the first time.
When you're a college football player, you know one day it's going to end. And one day you'd like to sit down with your buddy over a beer and say, hey, you know what? We beat Notre Dame. We beat the best. We beat the most historic.
And I had always thought, what would it be like to be an opposing quarterback? Getting up under the center at the 5-yard line, looking up at that Notre Dame defense, and then looking a little bit higher, and all of a sudden there was touchdown Jesus. You had to think to yourself, there's no way we can win here.
Notre Dame is a national icon. Perhaps no team is as revered, renowned, and hated as the Irish.
It's like beating the Yankees. Everybody loves to beat the Yankees. The opponents desperately want to beat you more than their biggest rival in a conference or something.
Didn't matter who we played, that team was going to be ready to play, and we had to play it really at our best because everybody wanted to beat Notre Dame so badly.
Everybody guns for Notre Dame. And that's really a testament to how good Notre Dame was during the glory years. Everybody was after them, and they won anyway.
Don't forget, man, today's the day we're gonna win. They can't lick it, and that's how they go. The first whistle of the man win there, and fight, 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 fight.
Knute Rockne is the father of the Notre Dame dynasty. In the golden era of sports, his teams were legendary, made famous by beating the best competition in the country.
But Rockne was more than just a great football coach. He was a visionary. He scheduled road games in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore. And this created the Subway alumni. These are the millions of Notre Dame fans around the country who never attended the school. And during the 1920s, a lot of those Subway alumni were poor, they were Irish, they were Catholic, and while they struggled with prejudice, they took tremendous pride in Notre Dame's success on the football field.
He made people who had no interest in college football care about college football. As somebody once wrote, Notre Dame's address is South Bend, Indiana. Its campus is the United States of America.
During the 1920s, Notre Dame would win in dramatic fashion as the Irish captured 3 national championships. But Rockne's life would be tragically cut short. In 1931, the father of Notre Dame football died in a plane crash. He was only 43. Notre Dame felt his loss, and for the next 10 years, the Irish struggled to maintain the tradition that Rockne created. But another chapter began in 1942, when Notre Dame named Frank Leahy as their new head coach.
Notre Dame students welcome new football coach Frank Leahy.
Leahy was a fanatic. His desire was for Notre Dame to go 10 years without losing a game. And he was serious.
He was a fundamentalist, and everything he did to perfection. And he expected his team to do it to perfection.
During Saturdays, he just became such a worrywart that sometimes he had to be calmed down at halftime in the locker room.
He almost died in the middle of a football game playing Georgia Tech, I think it was. We had to leave the field in an ambulance and take him to the hospital. He was always pushing the balloon. That's why he was so good.
Leahy played quarterback at Notre Dame under Newt Rockne. Like his former coach, he believed that games were won during practice, not on Saturday.
Notre Dame players, and I've interviewed many of that era, say over and over again, the toughest games they ever played were in practice. They were so tough, and Leahy was merciless.
Johnny Latner once asked him at a team meeting, he said, "Coach, why do we have to practice that play 1,000 times?" He said, "Jonathan, because 999 times aren't enough."
He was very sarcastic, and he would make you feel very small and make you feel to the point where, hey, I'll prove to him that I can do it. And that was kind of a motivating factor that he would use in his sarcasm. Like he used to say to me all the time, "Oh, John Latner, you should be in the Navy. You know, you're a cruiser." You know, cruiser? I thought at least I'd be a battleship, but not a cruiser.
During his career at Notre Dame, Leahy would produce 4 Heisman Trophy winners, 6 undefeated seasons, and 4 national championships. But after the 1953 season, Leahy was burnt out and would step down as head coach. Over the next decade, the Irish amassed only 4 winning seasons. But Notre Dame would enter another golden era in 1964, when they turned to an outsider for the first time in half a century.
Ara Parseghian was coaching at Northwestern, and they played Notre Dame, and they beat Notre Dame 4 times in a row, as a matter of fact. So the priests, you know, down there were seeing this, and they were thinking, hell with tradition, let's get this guy. He's a hell of a coach.
Though Ara was an outsider coming in, his success on the field endeared him to fans and players alike.
When I listened to Coach talk, I believed what he was saying. If we lost for a specific reason, I believed if we were going to beat somebody, he told me why we were going to do it, as long as I listened to what he said.
What I preached was, there's no circumstance that we can't overcome. No situation. Teams have breaking points. We don't have a breaking point. They have a breaking point, we don't.
Ara captured 2 national championships during his tenure with the Irish. He added his own chapter to one of the most recognizable dynasties in sports, as he brought back the mystical flavor that was Notre Dame football.
I would only say one thing to you. Just remember that you're a symbol of what college football is. This kind of spirit, if we could only pack it up and save it, right?
If you've been part of the Notre Dame family, you don't have to describe it. If you've never been part of the Notre Dame family, you can never really truly understand. But you don't go to Notre Dame to learn to do something. You go to Notre Dame to learn to be somebody. It's family.
I didn't really choose Notre Dame. I believe Notre Dame chose me. It always has, it always will have a very special sound to it and a very special feel to it. That's what separates, I think, the University of Notre Dame from every place else.
It really doesn't matter if you love Notre Dame or if you hate Notre Dame. You can feel the tradition. You can feel the ghosts of Rockne and Leahy. You can envision Joe Montana throwing passes on the run. You just have to love college football. Anybody who loves college football will tell you the same thing. Notre Dame is very, very special.
From 1901 to 1905, head coach Fielding Yost led the University of Michigan to 56 straight games without a loss. His revolutionary no-huddle offense earned the Wolverines the nickname the point-a-minute teams.
Between 1901 and 1905, Michigan outscored its opponents 2,800 points to 40.
In the first year, in 1901, when Yost showed up, only Northwestern got as far as the 35-yard line. So when Yost came in, he kicked some people in the fanny.
Michigan quickly earned national recognition, not only from the lopsided scores, but also from their coach's claim that his team could not be beat.
Yost rhymes with boast, and that's what he liked to do. When he won, he wasn't a quiet man. He didn't go shake hands and go to the office and plan for the next game. He loved the press. They could always get a great soundbite out of him, and he loved the attention. He would revel in the attention. But when you were the coach of a team that just got beaten 128-0, I believe it would have been difficult to stomach.
Alonzo Stagg and Fielding Yost never got along. They were always feuding. And Fielding Yost was hired at Michigan with the express purpose of defeating Chicago. So Yost always had a great incentive to beat Stagg. He would always be coming on with words like, we'll give you plenty next year, or we're going to whip you, you know what.
In 1902, Stanford and Michigan agreed to meet in an unusual intersectional matchup. The game would represent the inaugural Rose Bowl. It was set up in response to yet another of Yost's challenges that Michigan could beat all the teams on the West Coast. The Wolverines would back their coach's words, whipping Stanford 49-0.
If you were to look up the word arrogance in the dictionary, Fielding Yost's picture would be right up there next to it. I mean, he was one cocky son of a bitch. But he was also one hell of a coach. His teams made people realize that football wasn't just an Ivy League sport. He made it into a national phenomenon, into the pastime that it is today.